time at press conferences like a figure from another planet. Judge Johan Krichler will have to decide whether this election is, to quote the official definition, substantially free and fair. The emphasis will be on the substantially, but the answer will be yes. What seemed like a problem arose today, though, when Nelson Mandela, in a television interview, seemed to question the election's fairness.
It is clear to me that there has been a massive sabotage.
Later, an aide explained that Mr. Mandela had just been speaking out of frustration. Out in the northwestern Transvaal, a much more unpleasant form of frustration was taking shape. 250 diehards of the Nazi-like AWB had gathered to appeal to God, their God, to help them now as he helped the Boers in the past. As they listened to their leader, Eugene Terblanche, their mood was resentful and ugly, and they threw out the only black journalist who'd turned up. The police now say that most of the 31 people arrested after yesterday's bomb at Johannesburg airport were from the AWB's elite guard. The AWB seems badly damaged by the arrests, and though Terblanche told them that when God sent them a sign they should rise up and resist, it no longer sounded credible. It was also a world away from the election, which has reached even the Bushmen from the furthest Western Cape. They too turned out to vote today, figures from a remote past adding their voice to South Africa's future. John Simpson, BBC News, Johannesburg.
The process of undoing the work of apartheid has begun, even before the votes in this election have been counted. Millions of blacks were forcibly removed from their homes to make room for whites. Just 60,000 white farmers own well over 3/4 of all the country's agricultural land. A new court is being set up to return the land to its rightful owners. I've been to one of the first farms to be handed back at Malotostad in the Transvaal.
The dispossessed are coming back. Today, the Bakobang tribe were reunited with their ancestors. They found the graves of their grandfathers who owned thousands of acres of highveld around here by deed of title. Under apartheid, it made no difference. In 1968, it was declared a black spot and rubbed out. I used to watch whole communities being forced to tear their homes down. 3.5 million blacks were ordered off the land under apartheid. Those who resisted were put in jail. They were loaded onto government lorries and then cast out of their own country. You could tell where they were being put. All that was waiting for them were rows and rows of toilets, a fitting symbol of apartheid. They were dumped in huge resettlement camps, places like Onverwacht. In these desolate and overcrowded pseudo-countries, called without a trace of irony homelands, they fought a long battle with poverty and disease. It was a battle many children lost. Today it was a white man who was being thrown off the land. All this week, Yapi Klate has been trying to round up the 1,500 head of Brahmin cattle he's been grazing on the Bakobang's land. They're proving less forgiving than the people who used to live here and have now come back.
They are not going to farm there. They just want a place to stay. They haven't got money. They can't pay anything, even our pensioners. I don't know what they are going to do. They haven't got trackers. They haven't got cattle. Nothing.
The Bakobang have built shacks where their homes used to be and are waiting for somebody to give them the money to start farming again. It's one of the first of thousands of similar cases that could take the new land courts a generation to decide. Can you make everything the same as it was before?
Oh no, we can forget what is past, and deal with what is present now.
Piet Koornhof was the minister responsible for removing blacks in the government of P.W. Botha. He's resettled himself now, left his wife to live with a coloured woman 40 years his junior.
I hope to God they forgive. I asked for forgiveness many a time from God himself. So the future to me, like for her, really looks so promising and so good and so nice.
Not so nice for the Bakobang, but at least they got their land back.
They and the rest of South Africa will now have to wait until Sunday for the final result of their historic election. Peter.
Thank you, Michael. Here, the government has warned that absent fathers who are refusing to cooperate with the Child Support Agency could face deductions from their pay packets. Thousands of men who wouldn't provide the agency with financial details have been given interim maintenance assessments, which many are not paying. Today, the National Association of Citizens Advice Bureau released a report saying that the CSA is failing everyone.
The Child Support Agency today came under heavy criticism for failing to use its powers to force reluctant fathers to pay. 50,000 fathers have refused to fill out forms and have been served with high interim assessments to frighten them into cooperating, but so far none of them have been made to pay. Elizabeth Guy's ex-husband didn't fill out any forms, so the agency made a high interim assessment to frighten him, but they still didn't collect. She says she was twice told by CSA officials that they'd been told not to use their powers for fear of antagonizing already angry fathers.
The Child Support Agency have told me that they're not using those powers at the moment because it's felt to be too politically sensitive. Women in my position can't take any action themselves, so we're stuck without any money or any chance of getting it.
Despite fathers' protests, the government today responded rapidly by announcing that as from next week, fathers who won't cooperate will be sent warnings that their earnings will now be deducted at source, with punitively high estimated sums.
Next week, in individual cases where people have been refusing to pay under the interim maintenance assessment, they will be warned that we now have the power to deduct from earnings. It's in their interest to cooperate because in the vast majority of cases, their maintenance assessments will be lower than the interim maintenance. We do have the power to enforce, and we will use that power in the interests of parents and children and the taxpayer generally.
Today, a damning report from the Citizens Advice Bureau says only half the targeted money has been collected from fathers. It says the CSA is failing mothers, children and fathers.
In my experience, the majority of absent parents aren't paying, and the reason is quite simply that they cannot afford to. They've had huge increases in tax recently. They already, in very many cases, have significant debts which they're honouring.
The coroner's verdict today is likely to be used by campaigners as another example of a CSA-related suicide, although like most of the other cases, the agency was not found responsible for the death. The coroner said he'd be writing to the agency to make recommendations, but said the CSA was not to blame for the suicide of Sean Lyford Smith, who owed maintenance arrears of £700 and had a history of depression. The beleaguered Child Support Agency is now under fire from every side. Today's report finds few mothers who've benefited, while many have been made poorer by losing entitlements to some benefits. Some find living on irregular payments from ex-husbands a hazardous existence and are indignant at the failure of the agency to force absent fathers to pay. Holly Toynbee, BBC News at the Department of Social Security.
The wife of the Gloucester builder Frederick West has been charged with 2 more murders. She's been accused of killing Carol Ann Cooper and Lucy Partington. It brings the number of murder charges faced by Rosemary West to 3, all jointly with her husband, who's been accused of 10 murders. Israel and the PLO have set next Wednesday as the date for signing an agreement to implement Palestinian self-rule in Gaza and Jericho. The Egyptian President, Hosni Mubarak, who has been presiding over talks in Cairo, admitted there were still some areas of disagreement, but said he was sure they'd be sorted out in time.
In Cairo this morning, there was a four-sided meeting. The Palestinians and Israelis, who so often in the last few months have failed to seal their political marriage, being urged on by the matchmakers, the Egyptian President and the American Secretary of State, who sense that Israeli-Palestinian differences are almost at an end.
What I found myself to be so impressive was the sense of urgency that both sides now have about reaching a conclusion of this implementation agreement.
For several weeks, Israel has been pulling its forces out of the Gaza Strip and Jericho, which will become autonomous Palestinian areas under an agreement signed 5 months ago. That and the arrival of Palestinian deportees triggered a brief euphoria a few weeks ago, but that subsided as negotiators haggled over the size of the autonomous areas and whether the Palestinians will get their own passports, stamps and telephone dialing code. Tonight, Mr. Christopher arrived in Jerusalem with tight security at his hotel. He'll see the Israeli leader tomorrow, hoping to seal a final agreement. Mr. Christopher's arrival here and the news today from Cairo will probably not have convinced many Israelis or Palestinians that peace is now at hand. But if next week's signing goes ahead, then at last there'll be signs that the Middle East peace deal is bearing fruit. Mark Urban, BBC News, Jerusalem.
The Italian television tycoon Silvio Berlusconi has been asked by the country's president to form a new right-wing coalition government. Mr. Berlusconi, a newcomer to politics, won last month's general election, ending almost 50 years of political dominance by the Christian Democrat Party. Today's announcement comes after 4 weeks of negotiations between Mr. Berlusconi and his future coalition partners. Richard Nixon, the American president forced to resign over the Watergate scandal, has been buried in the grounds of the house where he was born. President Clinton read a tribute, and all 4 living former presidents were among the mourners.
Richard Nixon was always a contradiction, occasionally the visionary statesman, sometimes the sleaziest of politicians whose conduct in Watergate still fuels American suspicion of their government. At his humble family home in Yorba Linda, California, all living former presidents paid homage. Gerald Ford, who pardoned Nixon after Watergate. Jimmy Carter, who vowed to clean up Nixon's Washington. Ronald Reagan, George Bush, and President Clinton, whose eulogy seemed almost a memo to himself to remedy his own failings in foreign policy by emulating Nixon.
He came to the presidency at a time in our history when Americans were tempted to say we had had enough of the world. Instead, he knew we had to reach out to old friends and old enemies alike. He would not allow America to quit the world.
To some, Richard Nixon will always be the unindicted co-conspirator of Watergate, the paranoid Tricky Dicky. To others, he was, as he claimed, the voice of the silent majority, the statesman who ended Vietnam. Richard Milhous Nixon, the only man ever to resign the presidency, will be as controversial to historians as to contemporaries. His long and sometimes bitter journey, as one mourner put it, now at an end. Gavin Esler, BBC News, Washington.
The former CIA officer Aldrich Ames has pleaded guilty to spying in what US prosecutors described as the most damaging spy case in the country's history. Ames was given a life sentence for spying for Moscow and admitted receiving $2.5 million. He's now agreed to cooperate with the US authorities, who say his treachery cost lives. Fears about the safety of the Channel Tunnel are unfounded, according to the chief executive of Eurotunnel, Sir Alistair Morton. 1 week before its ceremonial opening, he confirmed that full car shuttle services will not start until October, although freight services and some passenger-only trains will start running in the next few months. It's taken more than 6 years to complete the project, which has involved digging 3 separate tunnels more than 130 feet beneath the English Channel. 2 of these carry trains, while a central service tunnel can be used to evacuate passengers in the unlikely event of a serious accident.
A week before the official opening, Kent Police have thrown a tight security net around the tunnel complex. This morning saw yet another emergency exercise underground, as Eurotunnel strives to get its vital operating certificate from British and French safety officials. Eurotunnel must prove that the trains and signals are totally reliable and that it can cope with the worst foreseeable emergency, fighting a fire and evacuating casualties from mid-channel. While British and French observers assess the latest trials, Eurotunnel's boss, Sir Alistair Morton, crossed to Calais in the lorry driver's club car of a freight shuttle. Despite the continuing exercises, he's insistent a single-track railway tunnel is the world's safest transport system.
If you think of the problem, if you're on a ferry at sea which gets holed on the waterline, or a plane in the air that runs into some kind of severe problem, an explosion or something, as in Taiwan the other day, where is there to walk to quite safely and calmly? Whereas in the tunnel there's a walkway the entire length of the tunnel, and there's an exit through a massive bulkhead door every 180 yards in either direction.
The joint firefighting exercises are concentrating on freight shuttles because their sheer size and open lattice design could spread fire rapidly. The car shuttles are less of a problem. Each compartment is fully enclosed, and the fire doors are guaranteed to contain the worst blaze for up to 30 minutes. But suppose it's not just a fire. What if there's a bomb?
If you had an explosion in the tunnel, if you did, and it's a highly unlikely event, the explosion will always find the easiest way out, so it'll actually go along the tunnel. It'll do some damage, there's no question of that, but we believe that the precautions we've taken are as good as anybody could take to ensure that we don't have that sort of situation occurring.
Tomorrow the police will outline some of those precautions, both in the terminal and in the tunnel itself.
By this time next year, there should be as many as 150 trains going in each direction every day, provided, that is, all goes well with the commissioning process.
That means convincing observers that the service is not only fast, but safe. Christopher Wayne, BBC News, in the Channel Tunnel.
Racing's first classic of the season, the 1,000 Guineas at Newmarket, produced the closest finish for many years. As they entered the final furlong, the race developed into a memorable battle between Coup de Genie and two outsiders, Las Meninas and Balanchine. Peter Bromley's the commentator.
Is being swallowed up, and it's Balanchine who's going on from Las Meninas and Balanchine. Las Meninas and Balanchine from Coup de Genie.
The subsequent photo revealed Las Meninas was the 12-to-1 winner, but it had been only an inch from being a dead heat. Since we've been on the air, it's been announced that the boxer Bradley Stone has died. He was 23 and had been in a coma at the Royal London Hospital after suffering brain damage in a British title fight 2 days ago.
The news of Bradley Stone's death came a few minutes ago from the hospital where he'd been taken after collapsing several hours following defeat in a title fight at the York Hall in London. Though he'd been passed fit by a doctor after being stopped in the last round, he later went into a coma at his girlfriend's home. It's reported that the ambulance called for him took more than an hour to arrive, but it's boxing rather than the emergency services that'll find itself once again in the dock after this latest tragedy. Earlier today, even before his death, leading boxing promoters were put on the defensive by MPs as, coincidentally, they appeared before a Heritage Select Committee hearing at the House of Commons. For boxing, the questioning can only get tougher. Kevin Geary, BBC News.
And the main news again. The government has accused Iran of sending money to the IRA and plotting to send arms. And the South African election has been extended into a fourth day to overcome problems at voting stations in some areas. That's the 9 o'clock news tonight from London and Johannesburg. Newsnight is on BBC 2 at 10:35. From the newsroom, good night.
And comprehensive coverage of the South African elections continues on Breakfast News tomorrow morning from 7 o'clock and can also be found on CFAX pages 151 to 159. True Brits, a major news series which gets close to the heart of government with unprecedented access to the Foreign Office, is on BBC Two now.
Good evening from Newsroom South East. The Prime Minister has accused the Labour leader, John Smith, of treating the NHS like a political football. It follows his visit to Barts Hospital today, from which the media were originally banned.
With the ban on television cameras lifted, John Smith arrived at Barts in the full glare of publicity. What might have been a quiet visit erupted into a major event as the row spilled over into the House of Commons.
What the Right Honourable Gentleman, of course, wished to do was to do what he has done on so many occasions in the past and take the opportunity of turning the National Health Service into a political football.
But little could hide the fact that the government had been forced to climb down by allowing the media into Barts, and the scale of the coverage only increased their embarrassment.
Substantial amounts of arms and ammunition have been seized during raids on homes and businesses in London, Essex and Hertfordshire. Ministry of Defence Police arrested a member of staff from St Albans who's being questioned about the theft of weapons. The MOD says there's no evidence of IRA involvement. Police hunting the killer of a London businessman who died after chasing a thief have issued a computer likeness of a suspect. Shukat Ali died after tackling a man who was attempting to steal a car radio near his home at Hornsey in North London. Detectives are treating his death as murder. They've released this computer likeness of a man they want to interview. They say he's about 20 years old and 5'8" tall. More than 240 jobs are to go at the Thorn EMI factory at Crawley in West Sussex. The company, which specialises in radar and electronic warfare systems, blames defence cuts and the general economic climate. And that's it. There'll be more news on Radio Kent and other BBC stations in the southeast at 10 o'clock.
Good evening. It was unusually warm last night, in fact record-breakingly warm for a couple of places. In Glasgow since 1947 and fittingly since 1942, the warmest April night on record. And another one's upon us with double figures virtually everywhere. For the next few days, high pressure is in charge, and we're on the warm side of this frontal zone at the moment, or tomorrow we still will be. It's having a job pushing it north through Scotland, but on Saturday I think it'll achieve that aim and run down across the country through high pressure, so a fairly weak affair. On Sunday, high pressure is in charge, but these fronts are waiting in the wings, I'm afraid, for Monday. Well, rain today and in the last few hours has been through Northern Ireland and Scotland. It's sporadic, it's mostly light. That doesn't mean, of course, it won't become more intense once again. And it'll be there, I think, for most of the night. If anything, drifting a little bit further north, while the rest of the country is underneath this cloud blanket, and hence the relatively warm night. So Friday starts then with rain touching Northern Ireland through much of central and northern Scotland. And once again, I think the coasts, or some of the coastal areas, will be rather dull with fog patches drifting in and out for Wales and much of southern England. But there'll be bright weather here too, as there was today. Down the Channel Isles, the same applies. The best sunshine, of course, is going to be inland. It'll tend, I think, to spread north as the rain moves into northern Scotland, so Northern Ireland, parts of southern Scotland as well will see a bit more sunshine. Of course, that rain, unfortunately, won't be out of the way forever. As the front starts to return south, you might find the day ends rather wet in Northern Ireland and southern Scotland. Temperatures are on the very warm side, where the sun is out, 21s and 22s, and not so bad elsewhere either, 15s or 16s, and even where it does stay dull in some places around the south, 14 or 15, with a sea breeze maybe bringing a bit of that cloud inland and making it a little bit cooler on the coast as well. Where the sun is out, it's actually quite strong at the moment, as strong as it is in Italy for much of southern England, and about the north coast of the Black Sea, if it comes out further north in the country. On Saturday, that front travels southwards, bringing fresher weather with it and a few spots of rain. On Sunday, average temperatures, but Monday, I think, cloud and some rain.
Congratulations. On Saturday night, don't miss the magic of Eurovision.
I won the world, no one happy as can be. I was defeated, you won the war. But if you want to see some more, I think you can show that you think you know. You're making your mind up.
Will Britain's Francis Raffel enter the Eurovision Hall of Fame? Join the celebration Saturday at 8 on BBC One and Radio 2.
Morning has broken at Tundish Hall.
I think we should at least get a bit each. Not convinced I'd want a bit.
So what you came here for was the money.
I'm wearing this as a tribute to Ali.
Oh, is that the idea?
I could have legged it weeks ago.
I'd leg it now if I were you.
The thing is, it's a man's waistcoat. Aren't waistcoats generally assumed to be bisexual?
I think you probably mean unisex more.
You think I can't handle a little mongrel like that?
We're talking pit bulls, not poodles.
The riff-raff element.
Hello.
Tuesday, 10:05, BBC One.
The DJ Dinosaur Smashy and Nicey in Harry Enfield's television programme in half an hour. Adult drama now on BBC One in Cardiac Arrest. As junior doctor Andrew Collins struggles to cope with the realities of hospital life, his colleague, Claire Maitland, takes a surprisingly direct approach in a case of sexual harassment.